Okay. Throughout world history, war has been prevalent. It has been the start and the end of many great empires, the beginning of new technological advancements, and aided in the creation of many worldviews that we recognize today. With our technological evolution through time, war and its horrors have become more notable in public. For example, the Crimean War, which is often referred to as the first modern mass media war in history, or the slightly more relevant Vietnam War, which took up massive airtime. However, none of that could ever compare to the role that media plays in the 21st century warfare. Now available worldwide, internet and television allow access to top media outlets such as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then you have your global, national, and local news stations. With all of this, how does warfare and media relate to each other? War between countries needs to be supported to stay alive. And not only does it need to be supported, but it also needs people. And media does just that. Media reaches people. Not only does it reach the masses, but it also reaches people with the same information, thus causing them to be influenced by thinking of perception. My name is Nadia Green, and my question today is, does media change your perception of war? I believe that yes, the media does change your perception of war. I argue that indeed media does influence your perception of war. I developed my question using attitudes toward Muslim women in the West, the interview of Leila Abdullah, and the historian participant in the stimulus packet. Both articles surround the theme of war and people's perception of other people, and how point of view affects the perception of war that you have. These articles connect through wars and people's perception of it. I'm first going to start off with my academic journals. And my first academic journal was about the war in Ukraine and Russia. So it was written by a lady named Joanne Sostek. And she argues that a possible major bias in the information that Ukraine citizens are getting is causing their perception of war and how they develop their feelings against war. And she uses evidence which are primary sources of the Ukrainian people and their actual sources that they're getting from the media. For example, evidence comes from 30 audio diaries, in-depth interviews conducted in 2016 among adult residents. Throughout the qualitative analysis of the diary and interview transcripts, the paper reveals how participants judge the credibility of the news and narratives based on their priorities. And next, I have a student research paper from a student at Stanford University. He argues that there are positives and negatives to media's influence. For example, for a positive, the news and media will often heighten the sense of urgency when it comes to helping others who are in war. However, a negative is some countries allow the censorship of television that can have less savory reactions. For one example, we're going to the war in Somalia, and he says that we're going to the war in Somalia of how many of the U.S. soldiers were actually killed in Somalia by Somalians themselves during this time of war, and the president lacked the urgency to go forward and get them out of there instead of going to go get them because of the people's viewpoint. He took the people's side and left them in Somalia when he really knew what was actually happening. Next, we're moving on to our opinion papers. This was written on the Washington Post by Matty Friedman. He was basing the article on the thoughts and arguments in the book War in 140 Characters. Matty Friedman is also an author, but quotes the book often which justifies for his credibility. He argues that the conflict there is much a war for public perception as a battle for territory. He mostly uses anecdotal evidence and the offer to push his perspective through. And for example, elsewhere in the Middle East, the author recounts how the tech-savvy militants of the Islamic State rose from the ashes of Iraq in tandem with the rise of YouTube and Twitter. Those new tools allowed them to inflate accomplishments, terrorize from afar, galvanize global attention far beyond the dreams of their predecessors. So this is technically saying that with the advent of YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and all these social media and even news outlets, they are actually being able to more so reach people across the world. It doesn't matter if they're actually in their home or not. And so my conclusion and solution. All in all, a lot of the evidence is based on a person's educations and anecdotal. However, I believe that this proves me correct. Even though I did acknowledge the counter-argument when I spoke on the negatives of media's influence. Even though I spoke of the negatives of media influence, in the past few years in the United States, we have began to realize that the media tends to do more harm than good. Although the solution seems far out of reach, I do believe that if the media were to some way balance itself out, balance their country first bias and the left-wing and right-wing bias, then we could possibly reach a harmony that lessens human gullibility. And this is my bibliography of all the sources I use.
All right, awesome. Great job, Nadia. Okay, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. Okay, first of all, what information did you need before you began your research, and how did that information shape your research?
Well, when I first started using the stimulus packet, I was already able to pick out my sources, to pick out the sources that I really wanted to use. And going through those sources in more depth, it helped me shape how my question would work.
All right, and then what additional questions emerged from your research, and why are these questions important?
An additional question would probably be, how does a person's priorities also affect their establishment into what's more important to them in the media and what they believe in the media? And how this was important is because it also made you realize how, it made you think about how media may be perceived in this Islamic community or the African American community or the white community itself.
Okay, thank you very much.